Have you ever wondered how a massive company keeps track of every single nut and bolt, making sure they're not overspending? Well, the secret isn't some kind of magic wand. It's a really powerful financial tool. Today, we're going to dive deep into the world of standard costs and see just how businesses use them to stay efficient and on budget.
So here's what we've got on tap. First up, we'll nail down what a standard cost even is. Then we'll get into the why, like why are these things so important? After that, we'll look at how they're actually built, compare the two big philosophies behind them, and finally, we'll see how it all works in the real world. Sound good? Let's go.
Okay, so Section 1. What is a standard cost? Let's think about it this way. How does a giant car company know if they're paying too much for one tiny little screw that goes into millions of cars? The whole thing hinges on setting a standard.
And here's the key thing to remember. A standard isn't just taking an average of what the company spent last year. No, a real standard cost is a carefully figured out estimate of what something should cost based on some serious objective analysis. You can think of it as a benchmark for excellence, not just a quick peek in the rearview mirror.
So now that we know what a standard is, the next question is pretty obvious. Why even bother? What's the point of setting these super specific targets? Well, it turns out they work kind of like a super important early warning system for the business. And this is really where the magic happens. These standards give you a baseline. So when your actual costs start to drift away from that standard, it's like an alarm bell goes off for management. It lets them spot problems, waste, inefficiency, overspending, and jump on them before they become huge, messy issues.
So how do companies cook up these standards? Well, it's definitely not guesswork. It's a really detailed process. Businesses use all sorts of methods, everything from deep dive engineering studies to poring over accounting data, all to create these essential benchmarks. At the very core of all this is something called activity analysis, and it's exactly what it sounds like. You identify, you describe, and you evaluate every single activity that goes into making something. It's all about understanding a process inside and out so you know exactly what resources and steps are truly needed. And this is where it gets really hands-on. First, for direct materials, managers have to deal with that classic trade-off. Do you go for the cheaper stuff that might create more waste, or do you pay up for better quality inputs that might actually reduce spoilage? And then for direct labor, it's not just about an hourly wage. You've got to factor in how complex the job is, any union pay scales, and of course, the full cost of employee benefits.
So who actually gets to set these things? Well, there are two main ways to go about it. You've got the top-down approach, which is just what it sounds like. Upper management makes the call. But, the bottom-up approach is often way more effective. People sometimes call it the team development approach because it involves everybody, the line managers, the engineers, the employees actually doing the work. And when you do that, you get much better buy-in from the team.
All right, once a company decides how they're going to set their standards, they have to pick a philosophy. And this brings us to a really important question. Should they be aiming for absolute, total perfection or something a little more grounded in reality? So on one side, you have ideal standards. They're sometimes called perfection standards because they assume this flawless fantasy world where there are no mistakes, machines never break down, nothing ever goes wrong. And then on the other side, you have practical standards. Now, these are still tough. They definitely expect high efficiency, but they're also realistic. They build in a little wiggle room for normal, unavoidable stuff like a bit of waste or some machine downtime. So which way works better? Well, experience has shown that practical standards are by far the better motivators. And why is that? It's because they give employees a target that they see as challenging, sure, but also fair. An ideal standard can just feel impossible, which leads to frustration. But a practical standard? That encourages people to really stretch and improve, which at the end of the day is what you're really after. Okay, let's bring this all down to earth with an example. I want you to imagine you're a manager, and it's your job to set the standard for machine hours for next year's budget. You've got a few different pieces of data in front of you, so how do you make the right call? This scenario lays it all out perfectly. A company is looking at its standard machine hours per unit, and they have 4 different numbers to choose from. Let's really dig in and see what each of these numbers is telling us. Okay, so let's walk through this like we're the ones making the decision. First up, 0.75 hours from the manufacturer. That's your ideal standard, right? The one they got in a perfect lab, not the real world. Next, 0.78 is what a competitor is doing. That's interesting, but it's not our process, is it? Then there's 0.83. That's what we actually averaged last year. And let's be real, that probably has some old inefficiencies baked right in.
which leaves us with 0.80 from our own engineering study. And that's it. That's the sweet spot. That's the best practical standard. It's a challenge for sure, but it's totally attainable for our team on our equipment.
And honestly, that's the big takeaway here. A really good, well-designed standard isn't about chasing some impossible dream of perfection. And it's definitely not about just doing what you did last year, mistakes and all. It's about setting a target that's forward-looking, that's tough, but that is ultimately achievable and drives real efficiency.
So, as we wrap up, I want to leave you with one last thing to think about. Let's say you set a standard, and your actual costs come in under that number. On the surface, that looks like a huge win, right? But is it always a good thing? Just think about it for a second. What if your team hit that number by buying cheaper, lower quality materials that might cause product failures down the road? It's just a good reminder that standards are a tool, and understanding the whole story behind the numbers, well, that's what really matters.